All right, hi everyone, and welcome to how to set up and assemble your AXIBO. So, if you have just received your AXIBO, you probably have a set of parts that look similar to what's here on the desk. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you, first of all, how to assemble the mechanical components so that you have AXIBO set up and ready to go properly. And then I'm going to show you the controller and then how to use AXIBO and how to get started using it. So to begin, we're going to take a look at what we have, what we got in the box, and how we put it all together. So the first thing you should have is you should have some cables. You should have two short ones, and if you have the slider, you should also have a long one. You should have the AXIBO controller, or the brains of the operation. Then you should also have an AXIBO pan tilt unit, and that's this thing. You'll notice that it's kind of floppy. We'll get to that. We'll show you how to assemble it. You should have a little bag with some antennas and screws in it. And we should also have two mounting pieces as well. And also, if you ordered the slider, you should also have the slider in your bag as well. Here we also have a camera as well to show the full setup. And then we also have two Sony NPF style batteries as well to power AXIBO. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at our slider and see how to mount the AXIBO pan tilt unit. So what you can do is you can take a look on the bottom and you'll notice that we have this knob. And this hand wheel down here is used to turn our 3/8 nut on top. And this can be used, this is a standard 3/8 16 nut, so you can use this to attach to anything. So if you've just got some cheese plate that you want to stick something on, or maybe some kind of quick change plate, that's fine. But you can also bolt AXIBO straight to it. So on the bottom of AXIBO, you'll notice that we have a 3/8 mount. So we have a mount down here already, which we can use to mount directly to the slider. Now, before we do that, this is not the configuration we want to use. In all kinds of different ways, depending on how, or just as a pan tilt unit. Now in this case, that's how we want to use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount it like this, and you'll notice there's a little screw hole down here. Now AXIBO comes with a little knob, and we're going to just put that knob in there, and we're just going to thread it in. So we're just going to turn it around. It only comes with one knob, so you don't have to worry about which knob it is that you need to use. And we're just going to thread it in. And then once it's threaded in, like so, AXIBO is going to be nicely locked into place, so it's really, really solid. So before I mount this, I want to point out a couple things. On the back of AXIBO, you're going to notice two things. You're going to notice two connectors. I want you to pay attention to where these are because we're going to need them later when we attach the controller. The other thing on that is already on the AXIBO pan tilt unit is the controller connector. So the controller is going to get connected here, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our AXIBO and we're going to hold it down against this plate, and we're going to turn the knob in order to assemble it. So it's just a couple turns, and then AXIBO is nicely mounted. So we're good, we're solid in place. Now we can mount the controller first, or we can mount the camera arms first. I'm going to start with the camera arms because the controller takes a little more explaining. So what we have here is we have the, this is the camera plate. So this is used to adjust our distance, so how AXIBO gets mounted this way, and connects directly to our camera. So this is another hand wheel with a 1/4-20 thread on the back of it, so you can mount to a camera or a cage or whatever you want. And then this is the unit that attaches to AXIBO itself. So this is the Z adjustment rail. So this moves up and down. So what we'll do is we'll attach this first. So we're just going to screw this in, and you'll notice that on this there's a slot, and that slot lets us slide this up and down. So we can slide it up and down and mount it wherever we want. And I'm just going to tighten it in place there. Maybe we'll adjust it a little later. I'm going to do the same thing with this. So I'm going to take the slot, I'm going to line it up on the side here, and then I'm going to screw this in. Okay, so now we've got our mounting set up. Now, when we're installing or when we're mounting our camera, the important thing to know is that AXIBO doesn't need to be balanced, which is really, really handy, and it makes the setup very fast. You can put your camera on here however you want. One of the things that we recommend is trying to get it so that your sensor is centered about this rotation axis and about this rotation axis. That usually gives you the best quality, especially when you're panning and tilting in the same move. But it is not incredibly important, and it does depend on your shot. So we're going to mount this, and I'm just going to mount it here, and if I wanted to be a little bit more picky about it, I might mount it there so that it's all centered, and then I might drop the camera down a little bit so that the sensor is also centered about the tilt axis. So that's pretty good mounting right there. So our camera's mounted and it's set up and ready to go. So finally what we're going to do is we're going to mount our controller. So before we do that, I just want to explain the connectors that are on the controller. So the first thing we have on the back here, and this is probably the most important part, is we have 5 black connectors. Now these connectors are the AXIBO bus connectors. So you can connect any AXIBO device to these connectors and you can power it, you can use it, connect to it and operate with it. So for example, we could connect the slider here, we could connect the pan tilt units here, and we'll be able to connect the focus and zoom motors as well, or any other external module. The bottom connector here is an Ethernet connector. So if you're doing some more advanced stuff, if you're working in virtual production, or you're doing some automation, this is a very handy connector because you can network many AXIBOs together. But if you're not using it, you can just ignore it. On the front, we have our HDMI input connector. So for connecting the camera's HDMI input feed. We have a USB-C connector for expansion and memory. We also have a trigger connector and the DC connector. Up here, we have the AXIBO camera. So to assemble the controller, the first thing we want to do is we want to add our antennas. So in the bag, there are 2 antennas, and they just screw on. If ever you've assembled a Wi-Fi router before, that should be very easy. So we're going to screw those on. And the other thing in the bag is a little Allen key. So up here on top, you're going to notice that we have 1 bolt, and that's used to hold the controller in place. Now the controller can also be used on its own if you're just using it to trigger a camera or using it to do some detection. It has 3/8 mounts at the bottom, as well as 1/4-20 mounts on the side so that it can be mounted directly to a tripod. So we're just going to take this, it clips in here, and then we're going to tighten this screw, which is going to lock it in place. Okay, so we've got our controller nicely installed. The next thing we're going to do before we go any further is we're going to use our cables, and we're going to connect our cables before we power AXIBO on. So the first one is we're going to use a short cable. Now how this gets connected is we plug one side into the AXIBO controller, and then the other side is going to get plugged into either the pan or the tilt unit. Again, it doesn't matter which one gets plugged into which black connector, as long as one black connector goes to the other one. So we'll plug it in down here, so I'm going to plug it into the pan unit, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the tilt unit. So I'm going to take it, plug it into the back of the controller, and then I'm going to plug it into the back of the tilt unit. And then finally, I'm going to do the same thing with the slider. So the slider has that same black connector on it. So we're going to connect to that with the longer cable. And then we're going to take this cable and connect it into the back of the AXIBO. So now we have all of our cables connected. They're out of the way. You can see that they're not going to be jamming in the slider. They're not going to be jamming up our camera or our pan tilt unit. And AXIBO is ready to go. Now to power it, we've got a couple of different options. The first thing we can do is we can put some batteries in, or the other thing we can do is we can also just power it through a DC connector. So this is a 12-volt DC adapter, or if you have an adapter coming from DTAP or something like that, that'll work as well. You can just plug it in and power it off the wall or power it off a UPS or something if you want extended battery life. Now, if you just want to operate it on the go, NPFs are a perfect solution. Any NPF battery will work with AXIBO, but you do need 2 of them. One recommendation is that both batteries are fully charged before you use them. This way you get the maximum life and you get the maximum power out of the motors as well. So for these, they just clip in like any other NPF battery. And once they are clipped in, AXIBO is now booting and ready to go. So next what I'm going to show you guys is how to use the LCD menu, and then we'll talk about how to use the controller.